President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I assume we're in a quorum call.
Yes, we are.
I ask that it be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I come here today to talk briefly on the Kids Online Safety Act before the milestone historic vote that we will take at about noon today. For years, in fact, for decades, Congress has discussed and debated the need for reform and safeguards in the internet. We've held dozens of hearings, brought Mark Zuckerberg and every other big tech CEO to our committees, and there's been broad agreement. Something needs to be done. We need rules, safeguards. Despite countless polls showing public bipartisan demand for legislation, nothing has happened, nothing. Senator Blackburn and I began working on our subcommittee when we held legislative investigation on kids' online safety. Throughout that process, we began to meet with parents who had lost their children because of social media's harms, from bullying, fentanyl, sex exploitation, and other horrific harms. As a parent of 4 children, and Senator Blackburn also as a parent, we felt deeply the grief, but we admired the grit and grace of those parents who came to us and demanded action. I'm haunted by one of the moms who said to us early on, I think speaking on behalf of so many of them and us, when will you stop them from killing people? When will you stop them from killing our children? Voting today, the United States Senate is finally taking action on big tech. And at its core, the Kids Online Safety Act is a simple, straightforward measure. It gives young people and parents the tools and safeguards to take back control over their online lives. It gives them that measure of power. It empowers them. It enables them to make choices about what they want to see and hear on the internet, rather than the algorithms that drive content, often repetitive, addictive content, about bullying and eating disorders that contributes to the destruction of their lives. 3 key principles in this legislation: accountability, safeguards, and transparency. First, social media platforms will be bound by a duty of care, legally required to exercise reasonable care to prevent their products from causing self-harm, suicide, eating disorders, substance abuse, and other harmful impacts. The duty of care is flexible because we wanted to keep up with the changes in technology and to be able to fairly apply to companies with widely different sizes, business models, and products. We recognize the obligations on Instagram or YouTube should be different from those for a startup, and that social media platforms are different from video games. Second, social media platforms will have to provide young people safeguards and set them to the strongest settings by default. Finally, social media companies will no longer be able to hide harm. This legislation will require yearly independent audits and access to data. Researchers, Congress, parents, all will be able to hold those companies truly accountable. Importantly, this bill stops big tech from avoiding their legal obligations to protect children. And we do that through a knowledge standard in the bill. The bill ensures that if Meta or Google know or should know that a user is a teen or a child, they need to provide them the safeguards under this legislation, where the platforms have information indicating that they are kids. They need to act and protect them. No more sticking their heads in the sand. No more excuses. No more platitudes that disguise inaction and irresponsibility. In short, we want kids to have more of the good that comes from the internet without the bad. There's a lot of positive. Kids experience it, but there are some really scary, toxic stuff that kids also experience, and they have told us again and again and again, they want to make choices. They don't want the algorithms to do it for them. And that's why we have empowered them to make those choices. We're not blocking or censoring content for them. We're simply creating an environment that is safe by design. And at its core, this bill is a product design bill. All my career, I've tried to protect consumers against defective products that are designed to make more money and more profits at the risk or expense of injury to people. Whether it is cigarettes that are designed to kill the customer through nicotine addiction, or car manufacturers who have been required to make their products safer by design through seat belts and airbags, or toys with small parts that endanger children who can choke on those parts unless there is sufficient warning to parents or caregivers. This society steps forward to make products safer, putting people, and particularly children, over products, and that is what we were requiring social media to do. We can no longer rely on the big tech companies to say to us, trust us. They betrayed that trust. And Congress has an obligation to act. Over the past 3 years, we've worked exhaustively to improve this bill. We've sought feedback, we've made changes, we've revised and crafted new provisions. We've robustly debated the issues with anyone and everyone who had concerns. And I am immensely grateful to Senator Blackburn, who has been incomparably important as a partner, as a co-writer and drafter of this legislation, as an advocate, because we share this common goal. Whatever our differences on other issues, this goal has been paramount for both of us over these past 3+ years. I want to also thank Senators Schumer and McConnell for scheduling this vote, and Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, for their leadership and support for this bill in the Commerce Committee. The Kids Online Safety Act now has 72 co-sponsors, nearly 3/4 of the membership of this chamber. That is unheard of for an important substantive piece of legislation that takes on the most powerful companies in the world. Looking ahead, I'm confident that we can build on this momentum. It is powerful momentum, but we need to build on it. And we can swiftly pass the Kids Online Safety Act in the House and enact it into law this fall, as kids come back to school, legislators will be returning from their home districts, having heard from those parents and children, just as we have heard here, about the dangers and destruction coming from the internet. Senator Blackburn and I have spoken with the House leadership several times, and I believe we have strong support and a clear path forward. Through this long process, our leaders, indeed our lodestar, have been those parents and young people. They are in the gallery today for the vote, and across the country, they are watching. Our nation is watching because the parents of this nation, not just the advocates and activists who came here to meet with senators before now and soon Congress people, but all of the parents of this nation who have a stake in the safety of our children are demanding this change. They're demanding the Kids Online Safety Act because they know firsthand the heartbreak and loss that social media can cause. We can't bring back the lives of their loved ones, but we can save others. These parents are heroes, spending countless hours living through the pain, telling and retelling their stories, bringing tears to our eyes, as the Majority Leader, Senator Schumer, has said so eloquently. He has felt that pain through them, through their eyes and through their hearts. And I particularly want to thank Senator Schumer for keeping his word and giving this bill a vote, keeping not only his word, but keeping faith with those parents. Congress owes them, and I am honored to fight alongside them. Today, the Senate will show that it understands we are in the midst of a mental health crisis in this country, particularly for our young people, that is aggravated and exacerbated by big tech. And the reason is very simply a business model that, in effect, relies on repetitive, addictive features driving toxic content at kids. They want back control over their online lives. Parents are asking for tools and safeguards that gives them a measure of control. Clearly, the need is so deeply and widely felt in this country. And the Senate today shows that it values the lives of young people over the political influence and the profits of big tech. The armies of lawyers and lobbyists that it has been able to muster, the false pretenses of, sure, we want regulation, but not that regulation, will finally be defeated. It is a historic day. It is time to vote. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank my colleague while he is still here on the floor for his diligence in his work and his partnership as we have worked on the Kids Online Safety Act. Indeed, he has put many hours, as his team has also put many hours into this. As we get ready to move forward with passage, I think we have to remember that it was 1998, the last time this body took up and passed a bill that became law that protected children in the virtual space. And a lot has changed since then. We've seen the emergence of social media. We've seen 100 million Americans born during that period of time. So thinking about these platforms and that emergence, when you think about Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and online video games, those interactive games that are pulling kids into those, you think about how social media has changed the lives and the exposure of children today. They have grown up in this. And as Senator Blumenthal said, you know, Mr. President, it's so important to note that there are laws that protect children from buying alcohol, buying tobacco, buying pornography, being taken to a strip show. We as society we've decided kids can't drive until they're 16 years old. They can't vote until they're 18 years old. But when you look at these social media platforms, there are no guardrails. And children are constantly exposed to content that encourages self-harm. That is why we have started to see over the last decade such a rise in cyberbullying. I had one mom tell me her child was bullied to death, cyber-bullied nonstop. I had a principal tell me, he said, you know, Marsha, it's interesting. Previously, in previous decades, children could go home and get away from the schoolyard bully. Now, that takes place over that phone, and it never stops. Indeed, many of the behavioral issues at school are related to what is happening online. And we have seen a rise in mental health disorders. We've seen an increase in eating disorders, online sexual abuse and human trafficking, drug overdoses in teens, and of course, suicides. Online challenges where a child loses their life. And we have seen how the way big tech approaches this, our kids are basically defenseless. That is why the Kids Online Safety Act has moved forward. As Senator Blumenthal said, we have worked on this. We have met with colleagues. We have met with wonderful parents. We've met with principals and pediatricians and so many people that are involved in children's lives. And that is why this legislation is focused on safety by design. And that's a change. That will be a change for social media. It will have that duty of care. There will be that toolbox for kids and parents to make it a safer environment. Those algorithms are going to have to be opened up. There's going to have to be a portal so bad actors in the virtual space can be reported, and the social media platforms will have to do something about it. When we started focusing on these issues and doing our hearings, what became so evident to us? Social media platforms knew, they knew that what they were doing and what they were allowing was causing harm. They knew it because the whistleblowers from those companies told us they knew it. But you know what? They were putting profits before children. So they did it anyway. They did it knowing they were harming our children. But children are not a product when they are online. That is the way social media has treated them. Indeed, Meta assigned a value to each child. That child is worth $270 a year to that company. That is the callous nature with which they have approached this. So we are ready to move forward with this today, and we do thank the parents who have shared their stories with us and have done more. They have advocated, they have worked, they have pulled neighbors and friends and those that work with children into a coalition. It's been pretty powerful. So we are ready to move forward with this, and we do thank Senator Blumenthal and his team. We thank the other members of the Senate, the 70 co-sponsors that are on this legislation with us. We thank Leader Schumer and Leader McConnell for their work. Commerce Committee Chairman Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz all have been supportive of moving this legislation, and it is indeed a testament to building consensus around bipartisan solutions that are going to last. We also thank, pardon me, all of the groups and organizations that have worked with us to make certain that this legislation gets across the finish line. And as we pass it today and send it over to the House, we know that we have Chairwoman McMorris Rogers and Congresswoman Kathy Castor and Congressman Bill Arrakis. Castor and Bill Arrakis are the House leads on this legislation. There is broad bipartisan support in the House, and we know that the House leadership is supporting, and we are ready to move this across the finish line and to the President's desk so that as kids head to school this year, they know they have new tools in the toolbox to protect themselves as they are in the virtual space. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that this article on the history of privacy protections for children and teens from Common Sense Media be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, today is an historic day. Today, the United States Senate will vote on the Kids Online Safety and Privacy Act, which includes my legislation with Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA 2.0. With this vote, the United States Senate will finally send a message to big tech that the days of indiscriminately tracking and targeting children and teens are over in our country, that their privacy invasive business model must change, that young people and their parents are more important than shareholders' bank accounts. This vote is long overdue. On June 20th, 1996, June 20th, 1996, more than 28 years ago, at the dawn of the information age, when only birds tweeted and the gram was simply a measurement, I stood before the House of Representatives and warned about the Internet's unique threat to user privacy. I stated then in 1996 that the Internet would allow corporate America to have the, quote, opportunity to track the clickstream of a citizen of the net, to sneak corporate hands into a personal information cookie jar and use that database to compile sophisticated, highly personal consumer profiles of people's hobbies, buying habits, financial information, health information, who they contact or converse with, when and for how long. The Internet would allow digital desperados to roam the Internet frontier unchecked. 2 years later, Congress enacted my Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. That was 1998, and it was for kids under the age of 13. That's all I could get in 1998. Protections for kids under 13 in our country, knowing that there was going to be an effort by corporate America to exploit those children. Now, how did I know that? I knew it because I had been chairman over telecommunications in the 1980s, when the television industry was targeting kids with advertising on Saturday morning cartoons, Saturday morning programs. They were pretty much turning all the programs into one big ad targeted at vulnerable kids. And so I had to author the Children's Television Act of 1990 in order to put protections for television on the books. But then, as the internet evolved, the marketers, the targeters all moved over from television over to the internet. And with it, Congress has to follow them in order to pass the laws to protect children, to protect teenagers from being exploited by the very same marketers, the very same companies that sought to exploit them on television. And as I explained back then, the original COPPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, can be summarized in 3 words: disclosure, knowledge, and know. Disclosure of privacy policies, knowledge of information collected on our children, and no to the sale of the information. That information should only be used for the purposes for which the young person and their family had intended it. So COPPA put real safeguards on the internet, at least for kids under the age of 13. But over the last 26 years, the Federal Trade Commission has brought dozens of cases against both household names like Google, TikTok, and even Mrs. Fields Cookies, and lesser-known entities. And during that period, the Federal Trade Commission has collected over $500 million in fines for violation of COPPA, of the Child Online Privacy Protection Act. The original COPPA law has done a lot of good. But as the years have passed and technology has evolved, our online world once again started to look like the Wild West, with the desperados in charge, exploiting teenagers, exploiting children, using algorithms, powerful algorithms, to target those kids. So in 2011, I introduced my Children and Teens Privacy Bill to update COPPA. And in every Congress since, I have continued to introduce that legislation, slowly developing coalitions, answering questions, building support to modernize and update COPPA to protect children and teens' privacy online. And it can no longer be under the age of 13. Now we have to move it up to age 16, because we can see very clearly the targeting that goes on by these companies, the exploitation of the young people in our country, and the vulnerability of that group of Americans under the age of 17 who, according to the Surgeon General, according to the CDC, are in a mental health crisis in our country. And social media has been implicated by the Surgeon General, by the CDC, as one of the principal causes of this mental health crisis in our country. And while knowledge and disclosure and know may have been effective during the early internet era, today that formula needs to be modified. The know must now be know, no, no. And that is the foundation of COPPA 2.0. No targeted advertising towards children and teenagers in our country. No excessive data collection of information of teens and children. No deliberately ignoring young users. For over a decade, I have been fighting for these essential privacy protections. In fact, if COPPA 2.0 were a person, it would have just turned 13 and would have aged out of COPPA's critical privacy protections, and that's unacceptable. I introduced it in 2011, but the power of those tech industries has blocked that progress that we needed. Yes, you want all the good things from the internet, but there's a Dickensian quality to the internet. It's the best of technologies and the worst of technologies simultaneously. It can enable, it can ennoble, but it can also degrade, it can debase. And we must now put these protections in because we know that these companies have been exploiting their ability to reach children and teenagers all across our country and largely unencumbered by any restrictions whatsoever. I know that privacy can sometimes seem as an elusive concept because strong privacy rules sound great in theory, but what does that mean in practice? Well, with COPPA 2.0, here's what privacy is going to mean. It's going to mean privacy will put an end to the manipulative, personalized ads that trick young people into purchasing unwanted goods and services. Privacy means stopping a search engine or social media site from collecting a teenager's eye color or location or other information which has nothing to do with why that young person had gone online in the first place. It's none of that company's business. And it also means giving teens or parents an eraser button to delete a social media post, to tell the company, delete all that information you've gathered about me, a teenager, or as a parent that you've collected about my child. Erase it all. And that right will be in the hands of the young person. It will be in the hands of the parent to just say, no, stop it. Stop collecting that information and delete whatever you have. Erase it. So there'll be an eraser button. So a youthful mistake doesn't last forever. So that's going to be a big moment, too, when we pass this legislation, to move the power over to the parents and to the young people. And most importantly, privacy means a fighting chance for parents and young people who are struggling against trillion-dollar platforms, looking for every way to keep kids and teens on their app. Today, with passage of COPPA 2.0, the Senate takes a momentous step to stand up to the big tech lobbying machine, to stop the privacy-invasive business model that exploits young people for profit, to give our high-tech regulator, the Federal Trade Commission, the tools to tame our modern digital desperados who are out there trying to exploit young people in our country. With AI supercharging big tech's algorithms and encouraging platforms to collect more data on young people, it has never been more important to protect our young people's privacy. With this vote, the Senate is finally meeting that moment. When I was a boy, and I was home with my mother, with my two brothers, and I'd be 10 years old, 9 years old, and a salesman would ring the doorbell. And my mother would tell me, just go to where the letter opener is in the door and tell the salesman that your mother's not home. And I would. And then I'd go to my mother and say, but you are home. And she would say, I'm not home to him. He's not getting in our living room. It's 11 in the morning. We're not having a stranger in our living room with you and 3 small children. It's just not happening, Eddie. Well, that same sense of privacy is still present in American families, in America's mothers and fathers. They don't want strangers in their living rooms, in their kitchens, in their bedrooms with their children. And what has happened is that in the internet age, those same salesmen have been able to get around that front door. They've been able to get into the lives of the children, of the teenagers in our country, in ways that the parents have had great difficulty in controlling. And so what we're going to say here today, on the floor of the Senate, is no. We're going to change this balance of power. We're going to hand it over to the parents, hand it over to the children and the teenagers, so that we can just say to those salesmen, those digital salesmen, those digital desperados trying to take advantage of young people in our country, no, you cannot get in. You cannot compromise the well-being of the young people in this family. So that's what this vote is all about. It's historic. It's long overdue. It was pretty clear what the business model of these companies was going to be long ago. At the dawn of the era, I was the Democratic author of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that moved America from analog to digital, from narrowband to broadband. Not one company in America had broadband in February of 1996, but it was all predictable. The pediatricians in our country said we must put protections in for this new digital world in 1996. So it was highly predictable. Those who cared about the well-being of children, of teenagers, were saying it all back then. Nothing is new. So today's a historic day, and we thank all of our partners for working with us and all of the outside groups who have dedicated their time, their effort, their resources to getting this bill to the Senate floor. I'm deeply grateful to Senator Schumer for his partnership and leadership on this issue, to Chairwoman Cantwell, to Ranking Member Ted Cruz, and to my partner, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana. In 1998, COPPA 1.0 was a partnership between myself and Billy Tozan from Louisiana. And today, with Senator Cassidy, we're going to take COPPA 2.0, partner it with the legislation of Senator Blumenthal and the senator from Tennessee, and we're going to make history. And then we're going to get it over the finish line and onto the president's desk before the end of this year. So I thank all the members for their cooperation on this. And again, I want to thank Senator Schumer for his great effort in expediting the movement of this legislation to the floor, and for, I believe, its inexorable, inevitable passage. So I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back.